Why did no one ever guess who she truly was? The night hummed faintly inside the parking garage, concrete swallowing the sound of her steps, fluorescent lights flickering in cold rhythm. Sarah Martinez moved with the calm of someone who'd walked through darker places. Her hospital scrub swayed around a body that carried quiet power, compact, balanced, efficient. Most saw just another exhausted nurse heading home after a late shift. None imagined the 8 years that had shaped her before this. 8 years buried beneath silence and secrecy. 8 years as one of the very few women ever to earn the trident of a Navy SEAL. But that was another life. Tonight, she was simply a trauma nurse finishing a 12-hour shift, the smell of antiseptic still clinging to her skin. Her car waited 3 levels up, far from the main entrance. She liked it that way. Distance meant peace. It also meant vulnerability, though Sarah never thought in those terms. Vulnerability was a luxury she'd learned to live without. The echo of her shoes followed her past rows of parked cars. Every sound seemed magnified by the emptiness. The mechanical sigh of ventilation ducts, the whir of a flickering light, the low click of her car keys in her palm. Her senses, even after years of civilian life, worked on a different bandwidth, absorbing, filtering, calculating. One part of her brain replayed the shift's final moments. Another scanned the environment without conscious effort. Then came the other footsteps. Faint at first, then clearer. 3 sets, different cadences, approaching from separate directions. Sarah didn't turn, she just stopped walking, listened. Air moved differently when people meant harm. It carried a tension you could feel before you could see. She exhaled slowly, almost imperceptibly, then continued toward her car as if nothing had changed. Her hand slipped inside her tote bag, brushing against the cool metal cylinder she kept there. A tactical flashlight, old and scratched, the kind the Navy had once issued her in a desert halfway across the world. From the corner of her eye she caught them, 3 men, mid-20s to 30s, spreading out trying to box her in. The leader was tall, shaven head, ink creeping down his neck. Confidence radiated off him, but it was the cheap kind, built on the illusion of control. The second was shorter, wide-shouldered, his posture betraying muscle without discipline. The third twitched with nervous energy, his right hand fidgeting near his pocket. Sarah's pulse didn't rise, it slowed. She measured distance, 15 feet, 10, 8. The car behind her reflected their shapes in distorted silver. The tall one grinned, "Evening, sweetheart, long day." His voice carried that oily blend of mockery and menace that men like him mistook for power. Sarah said nothing. Silence unsettled people who thrived on fear. "Come on," he continued, stepping closer. "No need to be shy, just hand over the bag and the keys. We'll make it easy." The others laughed, thin, ugly laughter echoing off concrete. Sarah's hand closed around the flashlight. Her mind ran through options: de-escalate verbally, retreat to vehicle, or engage. But retreat was unlikely. They'd already anticipated her route. Words at this stage would feed their confidence. Engagement then, controlled, measured. She let her shoulders relax, pretending compliance. "Okay," she murmured, voice low, unthreatening. "Just give me a second." Relief flickered in their eyes. The moment predators believe their prey has accepted defeat. That was the heartbeat she needed. The flashlight snapped on. A strobing burst of white light exploded into the leader's face. He staggered back, cursing, eyes clamped shut against the sudden blindness. The 2 others froze, startled by the unexpected assault on their senses. Sarah moved. Fluid, precise, silent. The shorter one reached under his jacket, maybe a weapon, maybe just nerves. She closed the gap before he could decide, driving a palm strike into his solar plexus. Air burst from his lungs, his knees buckled. She pivoted on the ball of her foot, redirected momentum, let his body fold to the ground. The thin one came next, desperate and clumsy. He lunged, arms outstretched. Sarah sidestepped, guiding his movement past her, using his own weight to send him crashing into a nearby sedan. Metal rang, glass trembled. He slid down the door, dazed. The garage returned to a tense silence, 3 groans, one woman standing steady amid fluorescent hum. The leader blinked through tears of light. Rage replaced confusion. He pulled a knife from his jacket, 6 inches of cheap steel, trembling in his grip. Sarah's heartbeat didn't change. Knives were messy, unpredictable, but not new. He lunged. She pivoted again, caught his wrist, compressed nerves at the base until the knife clattered away. The sound of steel on concrete seemed almost delicate in the emptiness. For a moment the 3 men just stared, like actors who'd forgotten their lines. "You should go," she said quietly. They hesitated, pride warring with survival. The shorter man coughed, still gasping for breath. The thin one pressed a hand to his forehead, eyes darting toward the exit. But the leader's face hardened. Pride won. He straightened, shaking his wrist. "You think this is over?" His voice cracked between anger and disbelief. "You have no idea who you're messing with." Sarah's gaze didn't waver. "You're right," she said softly. "Neither do you." He spat, gestured to the others. "Get up." Their fear shifted into fury, an old, dangerous alchemy. They circled again, slower this time, learning from pain. Sarah mirrored them with subtle steps, keeping her back to her car, limiting angles of attack. The space around her shrank, yet her focus expanded. Breathing steady, shoulders loose, eyes tracking every twitch of movement. The thin one lunged first again. People repeat mistakes when fear clouds thought. She redirected his momentum, sent him sprawling once more. The heavy-set one swung wide. She slipped inside his arc, landed a sharp elbow into his ribs. His grunt echoed. Then came the tall man, charging in with brute speed rather than skill. For a second, Sarah almost pitied him, the way desperation replaces reason. She parried, shifted her weight, and the world slowed into muscle memory. Stance, counter, balance, control. When it ended, the leader stumbled back, chest heaving, weaponless, humiliated. He looked around at his crew, both down, both struggling, and something cracked inside him. Humiliation is a dangerous fuel. He yanked his phone from his pocket, dialed fast, muttering into it. Sarah caught fragments, names, directions, urgency. He wasn't calling the police. Reinforcements. She inhaled through her nose, slow and calm. The equation had just changed. 9 years ago, on a foreign coastline, she'd heard the same tone over a radio, panicked men calling for backup that would never arrive. She survived that night. She'd survive this one too. He hung up smirking. "You're done," he said. "You hear that? They're coming." Sarah tilted her head, studying him. "Then you should hope they get here fast." He laughed, but it sounded hollow. Far away, an engine revved. The sound grew louder, tires screeching, headlights slicing into the dimness of the garage. Sarah counted, 1 car, then another, then a third. 3 vehicles. Her breath remained steady, though her mind mapped new routes, exits, blind spots. The leader's grin returned. "Told you," he said, backing away toward the newcomers. "Game over." Sarah stepped into the open, the overhead light pooling around her. Her scrubs were torn at one sleeve, a faint smear of dust on her cheek. She looked less like a nurse now, more like what she truly was, composure wrapped around discipline, a storm contained in silence. "You really think numbers change skill?" she asked quietly. But he didn't answer. The cars stopped, doors slammed. The garage filled with voices, 6, maybe 7 more. A group of men, swagger heavy, confidence cheap. The air thickened with adrenaline and exhaust. Sarah's hands hung loose at her sides. Her muscles ached faintly, but her mind was crystal. Every step, every breath, every shadow had meaning. They began to spread, forming a semicircle. Someone whistled low. "What's this, Nurse Rambo?" Laughter, nervous, forced. The scarred one among them, bigger than the rest, face carved with old violence, spoke. "You hurt my boys." They tried to rob me, she replied. He shrugged. Then I guess we're even now, you get hurt too. For a heartbeat, the silence felt electric. Sarah could have pleaded, could have reasoned. Instead, she studied his posture, the angle of his weight. She had been here before, different men, different languages, same arrogance. Walk away, she said one last time. No one moved. Her heart slowed again, one beat, then another. Beneath the fluorescent hum, something inside her clicked back into the rhythm of who she used to be. When she finally moved, it was like watching instinct made flesh. The nearest man didn't even see it coming. And for the first time that night, the predators began to understand what kind of woman they had chosen. He moved first, the one closest to her, maybe thinking speed would make up for skill. It didn't. Sarah stepped inside his reach before the thought of attack could travel from his brain to his fists. A precise strike to his sternum stole his breath, and before he hit the ground, she was already turning, her stance low and balanced. Another rushed her left side. She pivoted, guided his arm past her, and sent him stumbling into a concrete pillar. Pain became sound, sharp, echoing, brief. The others hesitated, the noise of their own courage dissolving into the stale air. Sarah's chest rose slowly. She wasn't breathing hard. She was regulating, controlling the way she had been taught, the way she had survived. Her mind divided the world into geometry, angles, timing, possibilities. One wrong move, one hesitation, and chaos could bloom into death. She'd seen it before, teammates gone in seconds because emotion replaced discipline. Not tonight, not here. The scarred man, the one who seemed to lead the new arrivals, watched her differently. His gaze wasn't reckless. It was calculating, as if he were measuring her, trying to place the quiet precision of her movements. He fought before. She could see it in his stance, the way his hands stayed open, ready, patient. He took a step forward. You've got training, he said. What are you, ex-cop? Sarah didn't answer. Her silence unnerved him more than any weapon could. Behind him, the leader from earlier, the tall one, the one she'd already disarmed, was smirking again now that reinforcements had come. His wounded pride was bleeding into rage. She's nothing, he said, voice hoarse. She just got lucky, take her down. Sarah almost smiled. Luck. People always called it that when skill looked effortless. Two more men advanced, one with a tire iron, another with a chain coiled around his hand. They split, trying to flank her, learning from the earlier mistakes. Sarah stepped back, her shoes brushing the faint oil sheen of the floor. The fluorescent light buzzed overhead like a slow metronome. The one with the tire iron swung first, wild, heavy, untrained. She ducked, pivoted, let the weapon slice empty air, then used the opening to deliver a controlled elbow to his ribs. His breath left in a broken gasp. Before he could collapse, she kicked behind his knee, guiding him down rather than striking with excess. The chain whistled through the air. It caught her sleeve, just fabric, but the sound it made against the cloth snapped something deep in her memory. For a split second, the parking garage blurred into another place, another night. Rain, smoke, a rooftop overseas, a man screaming through the static of a radio, her name, then nothing but silence. She blinked and the garage returned. The chain swung again. She caught it this time, wrapped it around her forearm, and yanked. The man stumbled forward into her knee, then crumpled beside the others. The scarred man whistled low. You fight like someone who's seen war, he said. Sarah's eyes softened for the first time. Not fear, not anger, just something sad. You don't want to know what that looks like. He studied her, then shook his head. You're right, I don't, he gestured at his men. But they'll keep coming, you can't fight us all. You're assuming I need to, she replied. Her tone wasn't arrogant, it was calm, like a teacher correcting a student. Behind them, the leader's phone buzzed again. He glanced at it, his expression tightening. They're almost here, he hissed. More. Sarah's mind measured time. Reinforcements to the reinforcements. The situation was unraveling fast. She had to end it before chaos spilled beyond her control. She scanned the environment. 3 rows of cars, 2 exits, dozens of pillars. One ramp leading down to the main road. Surveillance cameras dead, of course, and overhead lights humming like indifferent stars. Her pulse stayed low, 92 beats per minute. She'd been at 150 before, crawling through mud while artillery tore the world apart. This wasn't war, it was just noise. But she could feel something deeper, the quiet ache of familiarity. How easily her body remembered. How much she hated that it still did. When the scarred man moved again, she saw his hesitation. "You don't have to do this," she told him. He tilted his head. "You think you're the only one with scars." "No," she said softly, "just the only one who learned what they cost." For a moment the air between them felt still. Mutual recognition, quiet and painful. Then the original leader shattered it, shouting, "Stop talking to her and finish this." Ego, always the loudest voice in the room. The scarred man exhaled sharply, then stepped back. He wasn't going to fight her. Not yet. Instead, he barked orders, positioning the others. They fanned out again, blocking exits. 9 of them in total now, surrounding one woman in blue scrubs. The smell of gasoline and sweat mingled with the faint tang of disinfectant from her clothes. Sarah could almost hear the voice of her SEAL instructor from years ago. When outnumbered, disrupt their rhythm. Never fight their plan, make them fight yours. She breathed in once, steady, and moved. Not away, but directly into them. The suddenness broke their formation instantly. Shock rippled through their line as she closed the gap to the closest attacker before the others could react. One movement flowed into the next: strike, redirect, pivot, recover. Every motion born from training so ingrained it no longer felt like choice. The fight became sound and motion. Grunts, metal on concrete, the crunch of shoes slipping on oil. Someone yelled in pain, another cursed. Sarah didn't think, she listened to the rhythm of chaos, adjusting, anticipating, controlling. In the chaos, one of them managed to grab her wrist. Strong grip. She twisted out of it with a sharp rotation, forcing his arm into a lock and sending him sprawling. Another came from behind. She ducked, elbowed backward, felt contact, heard a breath collapse. And then silence again. Bodies on the ground. Groans. The scarred man staring at her like he just watched gravity reverse itself. Even he didn't move now. She straightened, chest rising and falling slowly. The smell of metal filled her lungs, the faint scent of blood, oil, adrenaline. Her hands trembled once before she forced them still, not from fear, from memory. The tall leader's voice broke the quiet. "You think this is done?" He was shaking, voice cracking between rage and disbelief. "You don't get to humiliate me like this." Sarah turned to him. "You humiliated yourself." He reached into his jacket. For a moment she thought it was another knife. It was. The metallic click was unmistakable. A gun. The sound froze everything. The scarred man swore under his breath. "Damn it, Marcus, don't." Marcus, the leader, ignored him. His hands shook, finger trembling near the trigger. "Get on your knees," he barked. "Now." Sarah didn't move, didn't blink. Her eyes fixed on his stance, his grip, his breathing, all wrong, untrained, dangerous. "You don't want to do that," she said softly. "Shut up," his voice cracked. "You think you can make me look weak." The scarred man took a half step forward, hands raised. "Marcus, listen, this isn't the way." "Stay out of this." Marcus swung the gun toward him. His hand trembled so badly the barrel wavered between them. Sarah's mind went razor sharp, 3.5 meters between them, half a second margin. He shifted back toward her. "Do it," he shouted again. Her breathing slowed. 1 beat, 2. She moved. It was so fast it almost looked impossible. A sudden sidestep off the line of fire, closing distance with explosive precision. Her hand struck his wrist, twisting pressure on the nerve cluster. The weapon dropped, clattering against concrete. Her other hand found his shoulder, spun him, disarmed, controlled. The entire motion lasted under 3 seconds. The scarred man just stood there, speechless. Marcus tried to fight back, thrashing in her grip, but Sarah held him with calm efficiency, enough force to immobilize without breaking. His chest heaved. His eyes darted wildly. "Let me go," he screamed. "You don't know who you're messing with." She looked at him, really looked, and what she saw wasn't anger anymore. It was fear. The kind that came after a lifetime of pretending to be tough. "Then maybe," she said quietly, "you should learn who you are before you find out who someone else is." He stopped struggling. Around them, the others shifted uneasily. A few began backing away toward their cars. The scarred man nodded to his crew. "We're done," he muttered. But Marcus wasn't finished. "No," he spat. "She's dead, you hear me." Sarah tightened her hold, not in rage but finality. "You need to stop." Her voice had changed now, low, steady, something almost sorrowful beneath it. He froze again, breath rasping. And in that stillness, the scene finally broke. The men turned away one by one, muttering, defeated, dragging their wounded with them. The scarred man lingered longest, eyes locked on Sarah's face. "You're not normal," he said quietly. "You've done this before." Sarah didn't deny it. "That's what makes me hate it more." He nodded once, respect, not admiration but understanding. Then he gestured for the others to leave. Engines roared to life, headlights flared, and the garage began to empty. When the last sound faded, Sarah stood alone again. Her reflection in the car window looked almost foreign, sweat on her temple, dust streaking her cheek, eyes still too calm for what had just happened. She wiped a hand across her face and exhaled. Her muscles trembled now, not from fatigue but from the crash that follows control, the aftermath, the silence after chaos. Her flashlight still lay on the ground, its beam flickering weakly. She picked it up, turned it off, and stood in the quiet hum of concrete and regret. Because deep down, beneath the relief, she felt something else, something she hadn't wanted to feel again. That part of her hadn't died when she left the Navy. It had just been waiting. And tonight it woke up. How quiet could a place feel after violence? Sarah stood among the echoes, a stillness thick with the residue of adrenaline. The cars that had roared away left behind the smell of exhaust and something metallic, faint but unmistakable. Fear, shame. The scent of it hung in the air. She glanced around. Broken glass near a pillar, a dent in a door. Blood, small but real, dotted on the concrete like punctuation at the end of a sentence no one wanted to read again. She'd seen scenes like this before, in places that never made the news, places where the ground remembered what people try to forget. But this time it was a hospital garage, a nurse's parking space, her car. For a moment her hands shook not from weakness but from release, the tremor that always came when tension left faster than breath could follow. She crouched, steadying herself with one palm on the cool concrete, eyes closed. "You're not there anymore." The thought came softly, a whisper from deep inside. She opened her eyes, letting the truth settle. She'd acted like the soldier she used to be, precise, efficient, ruthless only when she had to be. But even now, the weight of it pressed down like a familiar ghost. In the Navy, there was clarity. Threats were external, defined. You fought because you had to, because the person next to you depended on it. Out here, everything was murkier. There were no comrades in the shadows, only strangers with bad choices and no idea who they'd provoked. She straightened, forcing her breath into rhythm. Control again, always control. Her training had never left her. It simply slept beneath the surface, waiting for the sound of danger to wake it. And tonight it had. She looked toward the exit ramp, where tire marks curved away into darkness. The police would need those details, the cars, the faces, the sequence. She'd have to tell them everything. A normal person might have fled by now, driven home, locked the door, tried to forget. But Sarah had never been built to run from aftermath. She'd been trained to walk into it, catalog it, report it, face it. She took out her phone. Her fingers hovered over the screen for a moment before she tapped 911. Her voice when she spoke was calm, too calm. "This is Sarah Martinez. I work at Mercy General Hospital. I was just attacked in the staff parking garage. There were multiple assailants, 9 total, some injured. I have their weapons secured. Yes, I'm fine." Dispatchers always asked that last question twice, like they couldn't believe someone could be fine after something like that. 15 minutes later, the blue lights began to fill the shadows. When the police arrived, Sarah waited by her car, her hands visible, her demeanor steady. Officers spread out, scanning the area with flashlights. One of them stopped near the dropped handgun. Another examined the dented vehicles, the small pools of blood. They looked at her differently after that, not like a victim, but like a question they couldn't quite form. Detective Maria Rodriguez was the first to approach. Mid-40s, sharp eyes, the quiet composure of someone who'd seen both the best and worst of people. She introduced herself with a nod, then asked the kind of questions only experience could shape. "What happened here?" Sarah told her everything, or almost everything. The men, the ambush, the flashlight, the fight, the escalation. She left out the parts that would sound unbelievable, the fluid precision, the instincts honed by years of combat training. She made it sound simpler, smaller, like reflex. But Rodriguez wasn't buying it completely. When Sarah finished, the detective tilted her head. "You disarmed 9 men, alone." Sarah met her gaze evenly. "I didn't give them a choice." For a moment, neither spoke. The hum of police radios filled the pause. Rodriguez glanced around again at the evidence, the still trembling air of aftermath. "You've had training," she said finally. Sarah hesitated. "Medical." "Not that kind," Rodriguez replied softly. Sarah said nothing. She didn't deny it, didn't confirm it. Some truths had their own kind of silence. The detective studied her for a few more seconds, then sighed. "You did the right thing calling us. Most people would have left." "Most people don't like paperwork," Sarah said dryly. That earned her a faint smile. "You'd be surprised how many I've met who'd rather risk being caught later than fill out a form." They walked through the scene together, retracing steps. Rodriguez took notes, recorded photos, collected the knife, the flashlight, the baseball bat still lying near a pillar. Everything felt procedural until the detective paused beside the gun. "Do you know how to handle firearms, Ms. Martinez?" Sarah's expression didn't change. "I knew enough not to leave it where a child could find it." Rodriguez nodded. "No judgment, just understanding. We'll run the prints. If it's been used before, we'll know soon enough." Sarah's gaze flicked to the weapon. "It was a mistake," she said quietly. The detective looked up. "For them." "For everyone," Sarah replied. She didn't elaborate, and Rodriguez didn't push. By the time the scene was cataloged and the evidence bagged, dawn had started to seep through the narrow openings of the garage. Pale light brushed over concrete and steel, washing the violence in a strange, fragile calm. Sarah leaned against her car, watching the horizon change colors. Detective Rodriguez approached again. "You sure you're okay?" Sarah smiled faintly. "I've been worse." "That's not exactly comforting." "It's true." Rodriguez nodded, closing her notebook. "You know, it's rare we get people like you on this end of things, the ones who don't panic. You kept control. That probably saved your life." Sarah's eyes softened. "Control's the only thing that ever does." The detective studied her for a moment longer, then said, "We'll need you to come in tomorrow for a formal statement. Try to get some rest, Ms. Martinez." Rest, the word sounded foreign. After the police left, Sarah remained where she was for a while, listening to the quiet hum of morning traffic in the distance. The city was waking up, unaware that a small war had just been fought under its concrete skin. She opened her car door and slid inside. The seat felt cold beneath her, grounding. She placed her hands on the steering wheel and stared straight ahead. Her reflection in the rearview mirror looked calm, but her eyes betrayed her, that subtle tremor behind composure, the echo of adrenaline still thrumming beneath the surface. She drove home in silence. No music, no radio, just the rhythmic thump of the tires over asphalt, steady and distant. Her apartment was small, neat, minimal. No photos, no decorations, just the essentials. A soldier's way of living never really left. She locked the door, dropped her bag, and leaned against the wall. The quiet pressed against her like weight. She could almost hear her old instructor's voice again from years ago. After a mission, don't celebrate, breathe, assess, move on. She'd spent years moving on, from countries, from comrades, from the sound of things breaking. But this felt different, because tonight she hadn't been a soldier on a mission. She'd been a nurse walking to her car. And still, she'd become what she swore she'd never have to be again. The part of her that once acted without hesitation, that cold, precise part that understood how fragile life really was, it was still inside her, waiting, watching. She sat on the edge of her bed, head bowed, hands clasped. The tremor had stopped, but the silence hadn't. People called what she'd done strength, but strength always came with a cost. She knew it the way a scar knows the blade that made it. When the morning sun finally crept across the floor, Sarah stood, pulled back the curtains, and stared at the city outside, alive, loud, indifferent. Somewhere out there, 9 men were either running, hiding, or already in custody. She didn't care. Not about vengeance. Not about gratitude. All she wanted was quiet again. She poured herself coffee, sipped it slowly, and let her mind drift to her teammates, to the war zones, to the names carved on memorial walls. She wondered what they'd think if they could see her now, fighting again, but this time not for country, not for mission, just to walk home safe. Maybe they'd understand. Maybe that's what survival really was, the quiet act of doing what had to be done, even when no one was watching. She looked at her hands, steady now, unshaking, and whispered, "I'm done with this." But part of her knew she was. Because some battles don't end when you win. They end when you can finally forgive yourself for fighting. Why did the world always look so normal the day after chaos? The sun had come up like nothing had happened. People filled the sidewalks with coffee cups and briefcases. Taxis honked, and the city carried on as if the night hadn't swallowed violence under its concrete ribs. Sarah parked her car in the same garage, the same floor, the same space. The only difference was the faint yellow tape fluttering at the far end, marking where everything had gone wrong. She paused by the entrance, the smell of disinfectant and asphalt mixing in the air. It should have made her uneasy. Instead, she just felt empty. 8 years in the military had taught her that fear wasn't the hardest thing to live with. It was numbness. Fear faded after adrenaline burned out, but numbness stayed. It hollowed you out quietly, piece by piece. She walked to the elevator, her scrubs clean, her face calm, her heart still learning how to trust peace again. Inside the hospital, the fluorescent light felt softer, the noise of monitors and paging systems strangely comforting. Normal. She'd always found safety in rhythm, the predictable pulse of duty. The nurses' lounge fell silent when she walked in. Whispers, then quick smiles. Someone offered coffee. Another touched her arm, hesitant, like approaching someone who'd walked through fire and come back untouched. "You okay, Sarah?" one of them asked. "We heard what happened. Are you hurt?" "I'm fine," she said. It wasn't a lie, just incomplete. The rumor mill had already done its work. Everyone knew something had gone down in the parking garage, an attempted robbery, maybe a fight. No one knew details. The story had already bent and stretched into myth. One version said she'd screamed and scared the men off. Another said she'd pepper-sprayed them. A few claimed she'd fought like a professional. She said nothing to correct them. Let mystery protect her peace. As the day went on, she slipped into her usual rhythm: triage, assessments, urgent care. The work swallowed thought, which was exactly what she needed. She stitched wounds, comforted patients, answered questions. Each motion a ritual, each breath a step away from the night before. But trauma had a way of whispering back through quiet moments. During lunch, when the cafeteria buzzed with chatter, Sarah sat by the window, watching sunlight slide across the city skyline. She traced a finger along her coffee cup, thinking of the men's faces. The fear in their eyes when they realized who she really was, not by name, but by the way she moved, by the calm in chaos. She'd seen that look before, in other men, in other places. She didn't hate them. Not really. Hate required energy she didn't have anymore. What she felt was deeper disappointment, that after everything she'd done to protect others, she still couldn't walk to her car without fighting for her life. Her phone buzzed, unknown number. She answered anyway. Martinez. Detective Rodriguez, came the voice, steady, measured. You at the hospital? Yes. Good, I'll stop by. We found some things you should hear. The line went dead. By the time Rodriguez arrived, the day had stretched long. The detective carried the same calm authority as before, but there was something new in her eyes, curiosity mixed with respect. They met in a small conference room off the ER corridor. The hum of hospital life bled faintly through the walls, monitors, footsteps, the distant cry of a newborn. Rodriguez set a folder on the table. We've identified most of them. The ones you described, they're part of a group tied to multiple assaults in the downtown area. Sarah folded her hands, said nothing. 5 of them checked into an urgent care an hour after the incident, Rodriguez continued. Broken ribs, concussion, dislocated shoulders, you did a number on them. Sarah's eyes didn't move from the folder. They were lucky. Rodriguez raised an eyebrow. Lucky. That I still remember restraint. For a heartbeat the detective didn't answer. Then quietly, you really were military, weren't you? Sarah didn't flinch. That's not relevant to your report. It might be, Rodriguez said, because it explains how you're still alive. The silence between them grew heavier. Finally Sarah sighed. 8 years Navy SEALs, combat medic. Rodriguez let out a slow whistle, not mockery, but awe. That explains a lot. It explains why I left, Sarah said softly, not why they attacked me. Rodriguez studied her. You handled it like someone who spent a lifetime handling worse. Sarah leaned back. Training isn't strength, detective, it's survival. The detective nodded. And survival's a kind of strength most people don't understand. The 2 women sat in silence for a while, one soldier, one investigator, both shaped by years of witnessing aftermath. Finally, Rodriguez slid the folder closer. One more thing, the man with the scar, you remember him? Sarah nodded. He came involuntarily this morning, said he wants to cooperate. That surprised her. Cooperate. He told us everything, Rodriguez said. The ambush, the reinforcements, the gun. He said you could have killed them, all of them, and didn't. Said you told them to walk away. Sarah's voice was almost a whisper. He's telling the truth. Rodriguez's gaze softened. He said something else too. Said they picked the wrong woman, that they thought you were just another nurse. His words were, she was calm like death itself. Sarah exhaled, a weary half-laugh escaping her lips. Not the legacy I wanted. Rodriguez smiled faintly. Maybe not, but sometimes the truth doesn't ask what you want. They talked a while longer about the arrests, the charges, the process ahead. Rodriguez explained that the man who'd drawn the gun, Marcus, faced multiple counts of armed assault and attempted robbery. He'd be off the streets for a long time. Sarah didn't feel satisfaction, only quiet inevitability. When Rodriguez finally left, Sarah sat alone for a while, staring at the city beyond the window. The sky had turned amber, streaked with the gray of early evening. She thought of the scarred man, how he'd hesitated, how something in him had recognized her not as an enemy, but as someone who'd walked the same roads of violence from different sides. Maybe that was why he'd gone to the police. Maybe redemption still existed, even for people like him. Later, as Sarah clocked out and stepped back into the night, the familiar hum of the garage greeted her again. Same shadows, same corners, but the air felt lighter now, not because it was safer, because she'd faced it and survived. She walked slowly to her car, keys ready, every sense still awake but calmer. The yellow tape had been removed, the space was clean, almost like it had never happened. She stopped where the fight had begun, her footsteps echoing faintly. She could still see it, the movements, the faces, the sound of the gun hitting the floor. Ghosts replayed in muscle memory. For a long moment, she just stood there, letting the silence fill the places where fear used to live. Then she spoke quietly, almost to the air. "I'm not that person anymore." But the echo that came back didn't sound convinced. She got into her car, started the engine and drove toward home, the same route, same lights, same city. But something had shifted inside her. Because once you fought to survive, normal doesn't feel normal anymore. It feels temporary, like calm between storms. That night she didn't sleep easily. Her dreams came in fragments, a desert wind, a name she hadn't spoken in years, the sound of waves against a foreign shore. She woke before dawn, heart pounding, breath sharp. The digital clock glowed 4:17. She sat up, rubbing her temples. Sleep wouldn't return. It never did after dreams like that. So she dressed quietly, brewed coffee, and sat by the window watching the city wake again. Below, sirens wailed faintly in the distance. Somewhere, someone else's story was beginning or ending in violence. She closed her eyes. The mind of a soldier never stopped scanning for threats, even in peace. But beneath that vigilance, there was something new now, a whisper of purpose. Maybe, she thought, this was why she'd survived the service, the battles, the years. Not to fight again, but to understand how not to. She took another sip of coffee, the bitterness grounding her. The sky turned gold. And in that fragile hour before shift change, Sarah decided she wouldn't hide anymore. She would talk to Rodriguez again, tell her everything. Not about missions or medals, but about what violence does to the soul. Because maybe stories like hers weren't meant to be buried. Maybe they were meant to remind others that strength doesn't live in fists or fire. It lives in the quiet choice to do what's right when no one expects you to. The city outside gleamed with morning. Sarah stood, tied her hair back, and reached for her hospital badge. A new day. A chance to start again, not as the soldier she once was, but as the healer she chose to be. And somewhere deep inside, beneath all the silence and scars, the voice of her old commander echoed once more. Sometimes the hardest battle isn't out there, it's here, inside. She nodded to the empty room, as if answering him. Then I'm still fighting. Why did the past always wait until you started to heal before it came back for you? 3 days had passed since the attack, yet Sarah still woke at the same hour every night. 4:17, heartbeat sharp, breath shallow, eyes scanning the dark. The body remembered danger long after the mind tried to forget it. She went through her mornings quietly, uniform pressed, badge clipped, hair tied back with surgical precision. No one at the hospital could tell that she hadn't really slept, that she still checked every corner before entering a hallway, that she kept her back to the wall in elevators. They saw calm, they saw composure. They didn't see the calculation behind it. But Rodriguez did. The detective called again that afternoon, asking if Sarah could stop by the precinct. "There's progress on your case," she'd said, "but I think you'll want to hear it in person." When Sarah arrived, the precinct buzzed with low voices and ringing phones. A wall of mugshots stared back at her, faces frozen in the moment their luck ran out. Rodriguez greeted her with a faint smile and a cup of coffee that tasted like burnt truth. "Figured you drink it black," she said. Sarah raised an eyebrow. "That obvious?" "Veteran obvious," Rodriguez replied, motioning to a chair. The detective slid a file across the desk. Inside were photos, the men from the garage, their booking reports, medical records. Sarah looked at them without emotion, though her jaw tightened slightly at one familiar name. "Marcus." "He's not talking much," Rodriguez said. "His lawyer's trying to spin it as self-defense gone wrong. But we've got witnesses, security footage from a nearby traffic cam caught some of the vehicles arriving. The DA's solid on the charges." Sarah nodded. "Good." Rodriguez hesitated, then leaned forward. "You know, the way you handled that night, it's not something you can just learn from a few self-defense classes." Sarah stared at the file. "I told you, military, it's not a story I tell often." "I get that," Rodriguez said, "but maybe it's time someone heard it, off record if you want." Sarah almost refused. Then she saw the detective's eyes, not prying, just steady, human, the kind that had seen too much to judge. So she spoke. "Afghanistan," she began softly. "7 years ago, forward base outside Kunduz. We were extracting a field surgeon who'd been taken hostage. Small team, tight window. We went in at night, no moon, no margin for error." Her tone slowed, voice flattening into memory. "The surgeon was alive, barely. Locals said the compound was lightly guarded. It was. We walked into a trap ambush from 2 directions. Lost comms, lost visibility. I remember." She paused. Her fingers tapped the side of the coffee cup once, twice. "I remember the noise, not gunfire, voices, the panic. My yelling for air support that never came. I got separated. Ended up dragging the surgeon out alone, half blind from the smoke. When the dust cleared, 2 of my team were gone. One was still breathing, but we couldn't save him." Rodriguez listened silently, the room shrinking around the story. "When I got home," Sarah continued, "people called it courage. The medals, the commendations, they don't tell you how empty that word sounds when you know who didn't make it back." Her eyes stayed fixed on the desk. "After that, I couldn't pull a trigger again. I could patch a wound, stop a bleed, but I couldn't take another life even if it was justified. That's why I left." Rodriguez exhaled slowly. "So that's why you showed restraint in the garage." Sarah nodded. "There's always a moment, that half-second when you decide whether someone lives or dies. I've had enough of those." The detective leaned back, thoughtful. "You know, most people would have killed him when he pulled the gun." "I know," Sarah said quietly. "That's why I didn't." For a long moment, neither spoke. The hum of the precinct filled the silence, phones, footsteps, the constant pulse of other lives being sorted through the machinery of justice. Finally, Rodriguez said, "I think you did more than survive that night, Sarah. You taught them something they'll never forget." Sarah gave a faint, tired smile. "Maybe, or maybe I just reminded them what control looks like." The detective nodded. "Sometimes that's the same thing." As Sarah left the station, the late-day light cast long shadows across the street. The world looked the same, people hurrying, cars honking, the smell of roasted peanuts from a vendor cart. But everything inside her felt tilted, as if she'd stepped out of time. That night, back in her apartment, she pulled an old wooden box from the top of her closet. She hadn't opened it in years. Inside lay the artifacts of a life she'd buried, a folded uniform patch, a photo of her SEAL team, a small notebook stained with desert dust. She ran her thumb along the edges, feeling the grit still embedded in the fibers. One photo slipped free, her and 3 others, sitting on the ramp of a helicopter at sunrise. Their faces young, tired, unbreakable. 2 of them were gone now. The third was the one she couldn't save. She traced the outline of his face with her fingertip. "You tell me I did the right thing," she whispered, "but I still don't know what that means." She replaced the photo and closed the box. The click of the latch sounded final, but her heart didn't believe it. Later, as she stood on her balcony watching city lights blink against the horizon, her phone buzzed. A text from Rodriguez. "Rodriguez, one of the suspects asked to see you, says he owes you something." Sarah frowned. "Sarah who?" "Rodriguez, the scarred one." She stared at the screen for a long time before replying, "Sarah, tomorrow." That night she dreamed again. Only this time, the dream was quieter, not explosions or shouting, but the sound of footsteps in sand, the echo of her own breathing as she carried someone heavier than her across a barren field. When she woke, the ache in her chest wasn't fear. It was grief that hadn't finished its work. The next morning, she met Rodriguez outside the county jail. The detective held a visitor pass, offered one word: "Ready." "As I'll ever be." Inside, fluorescent lights hummed over gray walls and old air. The scarred man sat behind glass, hands folded. His eyes, when they met hers, were steady, not defiant, not ashamed. He spoke first. "Didn't think you'd come." "I didn't come for you," Sarah said. He smiled faintly. "Yeah, guess not." He paused, searching for words. "I wanted to tell you something. That night when you could have finished it, I saw your face. You looked at me like I was already forgiven." Sarah's throat tightened. "You don't need my forgiveness." "Maybe not," he said, "but I needed to understand it. You had every reason to kill us and you didn't. That stuck." He leaned closer to the glass. "I'm done with that life. They'll give me time, but when I get out, I'm done. Just thought you should know." Sarah studied him. The lines in his face weren't new, but the weight behind them was. "People say that a lot when they're caged," she said softly. "Yeah," he admitted. "Difference is, most of them never met someone who fought for mercy instead of revenge." She didn't answer. She just nodded once and stood. As she left the room, Rodriguez waited in the hall. "He tell you what you needed?" Sarah thought for a moment. "No," she said, "but maybe he told himself what he needed." They walked out together, the sound of the heavy door closing behind them echoing through the corridor. Outside, the sunlight felt harsh, unforgiving. Rodriguez squinted. "You ever think about going back?" "To the military?" "Yeah." Sarah shook her head. "No, once you've learned to fight, you spend the rest of your life learning how not to." Rodriguez smiled faintly. "That might be the best definition of peace I've heard." Sarah looked out at the street, people crossing, horns blaring, the world endlessly moving forward. "Peace isn't the absence of war," she murmured. "It's learning to live with the part of you that's still fighting." The detective didn't respond. She didn't need to. They stood there for a long moment, two women from different battles, both trying to make sense of the same truth. Survival changes you, but compassion redeems you. As Sarah turned to leave, Rodriguez called after her. "Sarah, what now?" Sarah smiled, a small, genuine curve of lips that didn't quite reach her eyes. "Now," she said, "now I go back to work." Rodriguez chuckled. "You're impossible." "Maybe," Sarah replied, walking toward her car, "but I'm still standing." And in that simple sentence, there was the quiet victory of a soldier who'd stopped fighting the world and started making peace with herself. When did peace start to feel heavier than war? Sarah never asked the question out loud, but it hovered there, unspoken, waiting behind her every breath. The garage incident had faded from headlines and whispers. The suspects were behind bars. The police reports were filed. On paper, the story was over. But the story inside her was. She still parked in the same space every morning, still took the same elevator, walked the same sterile corridors, smiled at the same nurses. But there was a distance now, not coldness, just space. A quiet between her and the world, as if her soul still moved half a step behind her body. The hospital was her refuge, and also her penance. Every wound she cleaned, every patient she comforted, felt like another brick in the wall between who she was and who she'd been. That afternoon, she was stitching up a teenager who'd split his arm skateboarding. He was pale, nervous, trying not to look at the needle. "You're doing great," Sarah said softly. "Almost done." He winced. "You ever get used to blood?" She smiled faintly. "No, but you get used to helping." He laughed nervously. "You sound like my mom." Sarah tied the last knot and taped the gauze gently. "She sounds smart." As she turned to clean up, she caught sight of her reflection in the metal cabinet. The faintest scar traced her temple, invisible to most, but she knew every line of it. A memory of a night in Helmand, a bullet that came too close. She walked away from that mission, but not from the feeling that followed. That survival came with a debt. Rodriguez had called once or twice since their last meeting, checking in, always casually. They'd begun to share more than just case updates, small talks about the job, the sleepless nights, the quiet ache that came from seeing too much. It was strange, Sarah thought, how trust could grow between people who never asked for it. That evening, as the shift ended, Sarah was halfway to the parking garage when she saw someone waiting near the nurse's desk, a woman in her early 20s, nervous, clutching a duffel bag. Her clothes were wrinkled, her eyes red from crying. "Can I help you?" Sarah asked. The woman hesitated. "They said you're Sarah Martinez." "That's right. I'm Anna. Detective Rodriguez said I could find you here. She said you might understand." Sarah frowned gently. "Understand what?" Anna swallowed. "My brother, he was one of them from that night." Sarah's breath caught just slightly. Anna kept talking, her voice trembling. "He's in jail now. She said he's different, quieter. He talks about you sometimes. Says you didn't kill him when you could have. I don't know if I should thank you or hate you." Sarah stood there for a long moment, every instinct torn between empathy and self-protection. Finally she said, "You don't owe me either." Anna blinked. "Then why didn't you?" Sarah's voice was calm, almost too quiet. "Because your brother wasn't my enemy. He just forgot he was human for a while." Tears welled in the girl's eyes. "He said the same thing about himself." They stood there in silence. The hospital intercom buzzed faintly in the distance, a reminder that life kept moving, no matter whose world had stopped. Sarah finally nodded toward the waiting area. "Come on, let's sit." They sat across from each other, under the soft hum of fluorescent light. Anna spoke first. "He's been writing letters, to me, to our mom. He says he wants to change, that he's reading again. I don't know if I can believe him." Sarah met her gaze. "People don't change because we believe in them. They change because something inside finally refuses to stay the same." Anna looked down. "Did you ever refuse?" Sarah thought about it every day. The young woman nodded, wiping her eyes. "I just wanted to meet you, to see the person he talks about." Sarah smiled softly. "There's nothing special about me." "That's not what he said." After Anna left, Sarah sat for a while longer, her thoughts circling like slow-moving clouds. She hadn't realized until that moment how far the ripples of one night could reach, how mercy could travel farther than vengeance ever would. That night she walked home instead of driving. The air was cool, the streets half asleep. Streetlights glowed like small fires in the distance. She thought of her team again, of Jonas, her whose last words were half a whisper. "Don't become what you had to fight." She hadn't understood then what he meant, but now she did. The next day at work, the hospital director called her into his office. "We've had a request," he said. "Community outreach program for at-risk youth. Some of the kids are from neighborhoods affected by gang violence. They need someone to teach first aid, maybe someone with your experience." Sarah hesitated. "You mean someone who's seen both sides of it?" He nodded carefully. "Exactly that." She considered it for a long time, then finally said, "I'll do it." The first class met in a worn-down recreation hall 3 blocks from the hospital. 12 kids, restless and skeptical, sat in folding chairs. Most were there because they had to be. Sarah stood at the front, her posture straight but her tone gentle. "You're not here to be heroes," she began. "You're here to learn how to keep someone alive until help arrives. That's all." The kids exchanged glances, some rolling their eyes. She walked to the table, unwrapped a trauma kit and laid it open. "You ever see someone bleeding?" A few nodded. "You ever wish you knew what to do?" More nods. "Good," she said. "Then this is where that starts." As she demonstrated pressure techniques, bandaging, airway checks, she saw something shift in their faces. Curiosity, maybe respect. One boy raised a hand. "You used to be in the Navy, right?" She froze for half a beat, then nodded. "A long time ago." "Did you ever kill someone?" he asked bluntly. The room went still. Sarah looked him straight in the eye. "I've seen what happens when people forget how valuable life is," she said softly. "That's why I'm here, to make sure you never have to." No one spoke after that. But when class ended, 2 of the boys stayed behind to ask more questions. Real ones this time, about medicine, about control, about fear. When she left the hall that evening, the city felt a little lighter. Later, she told Rodriguez about it over coffee. The detective smiled, shaking her head. "You're turning into a teacher now." "Not a teacher," Sarah said. "A reminder." "Of what?" "That people can choose to stop fighting before they lose everything." Rodriguez leaned back. "You know, for someone who says she's done with the Navy, you still sound like a commander." Sarah laughed softly, a rare sound, warm and unguarded. "Old habits die hard." The laughter faded into a thoughtful silence. "Maria," Sarah said quietly, using the detective's first name for the first time, "do you ever think about the people you couldn't help?" "Every night," Rodriguez admitted. "But lately, I think more about the ones I did." Sarah nodded slowly. "Yeah, me too." They sat there for a while, 2 women shaped by violence, slowly building something fragile but real, peace through understanding. When Sarah finally walked home that night, the city was quiet, the air cool against her skin. The hum of streetlights filled the spaces where memory used to hurt. She stopped by the bridge overlooking the river, the same one she used to cross to get to the base years ago. The water shimmered with reflected light, soft, alive, indifferent. For a moment she closed her eyes and whispered to the wind, "You were right, Jonas. I didn't become what I fought." And for the first time in years, the silence that answered her didn't feel empty. It felt like peace. What happens when the past remembers you before you're ready to face it? The call came on a quiet Thursday evening. Sarah had just finished her shift, her bag slung over one shoulder, when her phone buzzed with a number she hadn't seen in years. It wasn't the hospital, not Rodriguez, not anyone from her new life. She froze mid-step in the parking lot, the hum of traffic faint behind her. For a long moment, she just stared at the screen. Unknown caller, U.S. Goft Exchange. Her chest tightened. Only one kind of person ever used that channel. She answered, "Martinez." A pause, then a voice she hadn't heard in almost a decade. "Hello, Doc." She closed her eyes. Taylor. Master Chief Daniel Taylor, her old commanding officer, her mentor, the man who'd pulled her out of the burning wreckage on her last mission, the one she'd never said goodbye to. "I was hoping it was still your number," he said. His voice was rougher now, older, tired, like gravel over years of silence. "I didn't think anyone still had it," she said quietly. "Some ghosts keep their address book," he said with a dry laugh. "You've been hard to find." "By design." "Yeah, I figured." Another pause, then, "You still keeping people alive?" "Trying to." "Good. You were always better at saving than fighting anyway." She let out a slow breath. Why are you calling, Chief? Taylor's tone shifted, lower, serious. Because I've got something that needs your attention. Someone from our old unit didn't make it home. Sarah's heart clenched. Who? Derrick King. He took his own life 2 weeks ago. VA found your name listed as his emergency contact. Her pulse stopped for a beat. That's not possible. I haven't spoken to Derrick since. Since Kunda's, I know. She leaned against her car, the weight of memory pressing down like a sudden storm. Derrick King, their unit's sniper, the one who'd carried guilt like a second weapon. He, never forgiven himself for leaving 2 teammates behind that night. She, written him once after leaving the Navy, but the letter came back unopened. Now it made sense. He hadn't wanted to be found alive. I didn't even know he listed me, she whispered. You were his medic, Taylor said gently. You kept him breathing when he didn't want to. Maybe he never forgot that. Silence stretched between them, heavy with years of unspoken grief. There's a memorial next week, Taylor said. Small, private, just a few of us left. I think you should come. I can't, she said automatically. Sarah. The way he said her name, not Doc, not Martinez, but Sarah, made her flinch. It wasn't an order, it was a plea. You need to close the door on that part of your life, he said softly, before it keeps opening itself. She didn't answer. The truth was, she wasn't sure which scared her more, seeing the faces of people who remembered her as a soldier, or realizing she might not belong among them anymore. When she finally spoke, her voice was barely above a whisper. Send me the details. Good girl, he said, then added gently, it's time. When the line went dead, Sarah stood in the fading sunlight, her reflection caught in the car window. Same eyes, same calm, but underneath, the storm was building again. That night she didn't sleep. She sat on her couch, box of old medals and photos on the table. The faces stared back, teammates frozen in time, all laughter and exhaustion and unspoken brotherhood. Derrick's face among them, crooked grin, tired eyes. The kind of man who'd joke through pain and bleed in silence. She picked up his photo, thumb brushing across the faded corner. You made it home, Derrick, she murmured. You just couldn't stay. The next morning she told Rodriguez she'd be gone for a few days. The detective didn't press, just nodded. You going home? Something like that. Be careful, Rodriguez said. The past's got sharp edges. Sarah smiled faintly. Yeah, I still remember how to handle blades. She drove east, 2 hours of asphalt and memory. The landscape changed from city glass to rolling hills and pine trees, the kind of silence that carried its own kind of weight. The memorial was held at a small veterans' chapel near Norfolk. Only a handful of people stood there. Men in worn uniforms, women with folded flags, faces carved by time. Taylor was waiting near the entrance. Older, grayer, but unmistakably the same, posture straight, presence commanding. Didn't think you show, he said with a soft grin. Neither did I. He nodded toward the chapel. Come on, let's pay our respects. Inside, the air was thick with incense and memory. A folded flag rested beside a photo of Derrick, smiling in uniform, alive in a way that hurt to look at. When it was her turn to speak, Sarah hesitated. Her throat tightened, her palms damp. But then she took a breath. When we were overseas, she began, Derrick once told me that silence was the hardest sound to heal from. He said when the shooting stopped, that's when the real fight started. Her voice wavered. He wasn't wrong. Some of us come home with wounds you can't see. We walk through grocery stores like everything's normal, while inside we're still listening for explosions that aren't there anymore. She looked down at the folded flag. He didn't lose his fight. He just got tired of fighting alone. The room stayed silent long after she stepped away. After the service, Taylor joined her outside under the gray sky. You did good, Doc. She shook her head. Words don't change what happened. Maybe not, he said, but they remind people they're not the only ones still carrying it. They stood in silence for a while, watching the breeze ripple through the trees. Finally, Taylor said, "You ever think about coming back in some form? Not military, just mentoring, counseling. You've got that calm people listen to." Sarah smiled faintly. "I already am in my own way." He nodded approvingly. "Good, because the world needs soldiers who remember mercy." She looked at him. "You sound like you've been talking to Rodriguez." He laughed, a deep, genuine sound that cracked the heaviness. "She's a good woman. You keep her around." "I plan to." Before they parted, Taylor handed her a small envelope. "Derrick left this for you, found it with his things." Her heart thudded as she took it. Back at her hotel, she sat by the window overlooking the harbor, the letter trembling in her hands. She unfolded it carefully. "Doc, I know you'll hate that I called you that even now, but it's how I remember you, steady, calm, saving people who didn't deserve it. You always said we fight to protect, not to punish. I never believed that until the night you dragged me out of hell. I've tried to live with what we did. Some days I managed, most days I didn't, but I want you to know something. You gave me one more chance. Even if I didn't make it count, that chance mattered. Maybe it still does for someone else. If you're reading this, don't blame yourself. Some of us aren't built for peace, but maybe people like you can teach the rest of us what it looks like. You were the best of us. Don't stop being that. DK." The tears came silently, tracing down her face without sound. For the first time in years, she didn't fight them. She let them fall, not for him, not even for herself, but for all the ones who never got to find peace before it was too late. When she returned home the next day, the city lights didn't feel as harsh. The noise didn't feel like chaos anymore. It felt like life. She went back to work, taught her next class, smiled more easily. Rodriguez found her one evening sitting on the hospital steps, watching the sunset burn through the skyline. "Long day?" the detective asked. Sarah nodded. "Long life." Rodriguez sat beside her. "You look lighter." "Maybe I am." "You find what you were looking for." Sarah thought about Derrick's letter, Taylor's words, the silence of the memorial. "Yeah," she said softly, "I found forgiveness, not theirs, mine." The detective smiled. "About time." They sat together as the sky dimmed, two women watching light fade into something softer, something almost holy. And for once, Sarah didn't feel like she was waiting for the next fight. She felt like she was finally allowed to rest. How do you know when a war is truly over? For Sarah, it wasn't when the guns stopped. It wasn't when the medals were pinned or when the reports were signed. It wasn't even when she walked away from the uniform. It was the morning she woke up and realized she could breathe. Not because she'd survived something, but because she no longer had to. The city was waking outside her window, its rhythm calm and familiar. She sat by the small table in her apartment, sipping coffee from the same chipped mug she'd used since deployment. The steam curled into the air, fragile, real. On the counter sat Derrick's letter, folded neatly. She hadn't put it away. Some things weren't meant to be hidden. They were meant to remind you that memory isn't always a wound. Sometimes it's a map back to who you are. She looked at the letter once more, then at the sunlight spilling across the floor. The world kept moving, and for the first time in years, she wanted to move with it. At the hospital, life pulsed as usual, sirens, stretchers, voices layered with urgency and exhaustion. But Sarah walked through it differently now. Slower, softer. She noticed things she hadn't before, the way nurses comforted families with a hand on the shoulder, the way patients whispered thank yous with trembling smiles, the small mercies that kept humanity stitched together. In the hallway, a young intern rushed past her, fumbling a chart. Sarah caught it midair before it hit the ground. "Easy," she said with a calm smile. "Speed doesn't save lives, focus does." The intern flushed. "Sorry, ma'am." She handed him the chart. "You'll learn." He nodded, then hesitated. They say you were in the Navy, that true? Sarah smiled faintly, once. He grinned wide-eyed. Must have been intense. It was, she said softly, but this job's harder. He looked confused. How so? Because in this one, she said, you have to keep people alive without hurting anyone. He didn't understand the full weight of it yet. He would one day. That evening after her shift, she walked to the community center where she taught first aid. More kids had joined this time, word had spread. Some of them were new, wary, skeptical. Others from her first group smiled when they saw her, like seeing an anchor in a restless sea. She began the lesson the same way she always did. Quiet, focused, letting her voice carry calm rather than command. Saving someone isn't about strength, she told them. It's about stillness. It's about not panicking when everyone else does. One boy, small, wiry, maybe 15, raised a hand. Is that what you did in the Navy? Sarah paused. Sometimes, she said, but most of the time I was just trying to keep my friends alive long enough to go home. Did you ever lose one? He asked. She met his eyes. Yes. The room went still. And that's why I'm here, she continued. Because I can't change what's gone, but I can teach you how not to repeat it. Something in her voice, soft but unbreakable, filled the room with a quiet kind of respect. When the session ended, the kids filed out one by one. A few lingered, thanking her shyly. One girl slipped a small paper into Sarah's hand, a crude drawing of a medic patch and the words "for helping people." Sarah smiled. Thank you, I'll keep this. As she locked up, she caught her reflection in the glass door, the same face but different eyes. They weren't haunted anymore. They were present. On her walk home, she passed the bridge again, the same one she'd stood on weeks before, whispering to ghosts. The river shimmered beneath her, quiet, steady. She leaned against the railing, the night breeze cool on her face. For a while she said nothing. She didn't need to. The silence was enough. Her phone buzzed once, a message from Rodriguez. Rodriguez, coffee tomorrow. My treat. You owe me a story with a happy ending. Sarah typed back. Sarah, you'll have to settle for a peaceful one. Rodriguez, deal. She smiled, pocketed the phone, and watched the lights dance on the water. The truth was, she'd found something close to happiness, but not the kind people wrote songs about. This was quieter, humble, the kind born from learning to forgive the person you were when you had no choice but to survive. The next day she stopped by the police precinct. Rodriguez met her out front, 2 coffees in hand. Black, no sugar, the detective said. I remember. Sarah took it with a nod. You always remember the important details. They sat on a bench nearby, watching officers and civilians move in and out of the building. For once, neither looked tired. Rodriguez sipped her coffee. You ever think you'll tell your story, like publicly? Sarah chuckled softly. You mean stand in front of a camera and talk about trauma, not my thing. I don't mean interviews, Rodriguez said. I mean someone needs to hear it, the right people, the ones who think strength means silence. Sarah was quiet for a long moment. Then she said, maybe someday, when I can tell it without bleeding. Rodriguez smiled. Fair enough. They sat in companionable silence for a while, sunlight breaking through scattered clouds. You know what I've realized, Maria, Sarah said finally. Peace isn't something you win, it's something you practice. Rodriguez nodded. Every damn day. They clinked coffee cups, a small, wordless salute. Later that evening, back at her apartment, Sarah opened her journal. She hadn't written in months. The first page still held the same old line from years ago, be calm, be precise, be unseen. She stared at it for a long moment, then crossed it out. Beneath it, she wrote something new. Be kind, be patient, be human. She closed the notebook, feeling the finality of it, not an ending but a return. Outside, the night carried a low hum of life, traffic, wind, distant laughter. It wasn't quiet, but it wasn't chaos either. It was balance. Sarah stood by the window, looking out at the city that had both tested and healed her. She thought of the men from that night, of Anna and her brother, of Taylor, Derrick, Rodriguez, the kids, and the version of herself she'd finally stopped running from. Each one of them had been a mirror. Each one had shown her something she needed to see. And now, as dawn began to bloom faintly on the horizon, she whispered to no one in particular, to all of them maybe. "You were right, dignity doesn't speak, it simply acts." Her words hung in the air, carried off by the first breeze of morning. In that moment, Sarah didn't feel like a soldier or a survivor or a medic or a victim. She just felt alive. Not because the past had vanished, but because she'd finally made peace with carrying it. She picked up her hospital badge, clipped it to her uniform, and stepped out into the waking city. The light was warm, the air smelled of rain and new beginnings. And as she walked toward the day ahead, no mission, no orders, no enemies, there was only one truth left inside her, steady as a heartbeat. Sometimes, the bravest thing you can do isn't to fight. It's to forgive. And sometimes, dignity doesn't speak. It simply acts.